Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to a post on, well, it's not a science post. It's a bit about traumatic medical treatments, but it is more about efforts to control people, social engineering. That's what it's about. It's called The Shocking Treatment of 3 Naomis. The first Naomi wrote a book called Shock Doctrine, a book that showed how U.S. shock and awe military strategy was influenced by CIA brainwashing studies from the 1960s. Even though the research showed that shock therapy brainwashing techniques merely destroyed people, the belief that shock therapy could transform people and countries into a friendlier form persisted at all levels and was used to develop and justify torture programs worldwide. The shock therapy brainwashing research involved CIA-subsidized depression treatments done in Canada on hundreds of unhappy U.S. housewives who were dosed with insulin and LSD while held for weeks in sensory deprivation tanks installed in horse stalls, only to be taken out to have their brains zapped with intense jolts of electricity. Afterward, many of the treated women needed to be diapered and hand-fed for months until their brains healed. Decades of memories were erased, and bones were broken by this treatment. This calls to mind Lady Gaga's video, Bad Romance. If you click on the blog link, you'll see Lady Gaga's video, and it's sort of an artistic take on the idea that if your wife is unhappy, just send her to a special clinic and she will come back to you as a sex machine. That is sort of what the CIA's doctors promised the husbands of these unhappy women that they treated in this barbaric manner in horse stalls in Canada. Naomi's book made some powerful people look bad, and many wanted to discredit it. The most effective way to discredit someone is to ignore them, but when it became clear that readers liked Naomi's book, several reviews were published in prominent newspapers criticizing her for simplifying complex political issues. That's such a popular defense these days. I see it in physics. I see it everywhere. Anytime you don't want people to understand something, you just say, it's so much more complicated than that. You have to work harder to understand the details. And sometimes this is true, but it's often not true, especially whenever a PR firm is involved. For those who want to maintain control or do sort of social engineering, those who simplify inflammatory issues are very bad, because when people understand what is going on in the world, they may change their behavior in unexpected ways. If there is one thing that control freaks hate, it's unpredictability. They prefer if we are all like cattle, set in our ways, easy to anticipate our reactions. This love of the illusion of control is what caused the shocking treatment of Miss Naomi Klein, the first Naomi. The second Naomi that I'll talk about, she wrote The Beauty Myth about beauty standards, feminism, and women's health. Most readers appreciated her personal yet meta approach to analyzing how our world works, both for and against women. But when she became too popular, reviewers nitpicked over details and called her work sloppy. After seeing her attacked for sloppiness, many women didn't want her as their feminist spokesperson, and they joined in with the chorus of complaints coming from men who didn't want feminists to speak at all. Her research was a bit sloppy in comparison to that of the first Naomi, but her simplifying look at the complex big picture was valuable to many readers. As in the case of the first Naomi, the powers that be, those who want to control things, don't like it when the big picture is simplified for a lay audience, because that reduces their ability to control the messages people absorb. But it also prevents the system from healing itself for people. It prevents people from moving forwards. It can cause friction within the system that may cause abrupt slips, and abrupt changes in a system are always rather traumatic. These sorts of powers or control freaks put their foot down after Naomi's 9th book came out, and she was fact-checked on a live British radio show about an obscure detail of British Victorian law that she wrote about in her book. The live gotcha moment had the quality of a hit job carried out by a professional PR assassin. Shortly thereafter, her writing career was over, and her books were literally pulped. Whoever launched the campaign to end her writing career was effective. Her Wikipedia page is absolutely brutal in its portrayal of her work. I mean, pulped? Modern-day book burning of a feminist author? Those bastards. PR is a dark art, and you can pay for it if whatever kind of PR you want if you have the money. Tarring and feathering someone's entire body of work by discrediting individual details is a dirty trick, and it only fails when an audience is aware of the technique. I don't think that Naomi was a nitwit. Her books are too well written for that to be the case, and many of the details taken out of context to make Naomi look stupid and ridiculous. They're not that bad and could easily be corrected without affecting her overall argument. But when these details are used against her in a Fox News style hit job, the condemnation is quite effective. It is sad that this technique of discrediting details works on so many people. The detail that killed her career was her use of statistics from Victorian times that listed a sentence of death recorded for crimes of sodomy. She was delivered this gotcha on a live radio show by someone who claimed to know the obscure legal fact that death recorded meant that the sentence was something not as bad as death. A Wikipedia page on the meaning of death recorded was even made after the Wikipedia radio broadcast. And everybody knows that when something ends up on Wikipedia, it is true. This was a very thorough PR firm. Who should we believe in this case? A woman who spent years doing research for a book on the history of homosexuality and the courts? Or some guy who out of nowhere shows up on a radio show and claims to know the obscure details of Victorian criminal law? I suspect that this radio show gotcha was a hit job planned in advance to take out Naomi, someone who had probably pissed off someone powerful at some point. I mean, if you write 9 books, you're going to write something that makes somebody mad. I'm just shocked that anyone would bother with going about this by defending the Victorian justice system. Perhaps foundation myths are very important to some people. The other detail that they hit Naomi with was her reporting that most women have eating disorders in America, and that 100,000 women die each year from an eating disorder. She took this number from a book that had, in fact, misquoted it from a study, and she was happy to correct the number in her book, as it didn't change her overall arguments. But the number her fact-checkers insisted on was not 100,000, but 50. They insisted that the data shows that only 50 women die each year from eating disorders in America. Really? That's quite a discrepancy. If you look at obesity rates and how women eat in the US, 100,000 sounds much closer to reality than 50. The estimate of 50 may be true if you only count rich girls who died in a last-ditch effort to save their lives with an expensive treatment program. But my experience in the US of the 90s was that eating disorders were everywhere, and that those disorders don't kill you in a visible way. They are a death by 1,000 cuts as kidneys and livers are slowly destroyed. If I count the number of women who started doing drugs to try to lose weight, the 100,000 deaths figure sounds much more accurate than 50. People die all of the time, and the original cause is often indirect. In the case of the second Naomi, the cause of the death of her writing career was quite direct. Just like the first Naomi, the second Naomi was trying to show lay people the big picture by translating academic jargon into easily accessible personal stories. But certain people do not want those sorts of stories told because they are afraid that it will make too many people angry and rebellious. When I investigate Naomi's critics, I notice that something about them just doesn't look right. There are videos by someone named Skepchick, and when I look at this woman, what I see is a fake feminist liberal. I think she is a character invented by a PR firm. And it may seem like a strange diagnosis, but her costume just does not look authentic to me. She appears to look like a young feminist hipster. She dyes her hair red, she wears a t-shirt, she wears thick glasses despite being over 40 years old, while reading a script written by an old white man. That's what she sounds like to me. It just doesn't fit. Look at all of the conference badges hanging in the background of her videos. That doesn't look terribly countercultural or authentic. To me, this lady looks like a shill paid by a tone-deaf conservative PR firm to discredit Naomi Wolf. She seems like a hired gun. So this led me, just watching this one video led me to investigate her further to try to understand the dark world of PR firms. The woman in the video, Skepchick, has been on the internet for about a decade, and she branded herself as Skepchick, attending atheism, feminism, and scientific events, while claiming to be an atheist, feminist, scientist skeptic. Yet, if you look at what she did at these events, she was subtly undermining each of the three causes. For example, at the atheism conference, she would raise a fuss about the sexism of atheists. She would trumpet an innocuous feminist theme, or in a video about how feminist she was, she would trumpet an innocuous feminist theme, but then spend most of her time making fun of how stupid a group called TERFs are. And I had to look up what a TERF was. It seems that the current feminist boogeyman is called the trans-excluding radical feminist. But do these people even exist in significant quantities, or did they just make this group up? A good technique to discredit a group, feminists in this case, is to find a tiny, ridiculous minority and showcase their behavior. If you can pit marginalized groups against one another, so much the better. That's what I think this person has been doing with her effort to develop an internet presence. And the fact that this supposedly feminist skeptic is engaging in this tactic against a real feminist named Naomi Wolf, it made me suspicious of who is paying her. She just seems like a shill, and in the future I make another video about her. In the style of someone educated in the shock and awe psychology of Naomi Klein's CIA, this skepchick once did a post on why electroconvulsive therapy or shock therapy is good for people. In that video, she presented a biased pseudoscientific argument that if someone is about to commit suicide and shock therapy stops this from happening, then it works. But let's think about this attitude. I could hit you on the head with a hammer and that would effectively stop you from killing yourself. But that doesn't mean that we should start hitting depressed people on the head with hammers. And in a very real sense, shock therapy is a lot like hitting someone on the head with a hammer. It causes brain damage. The science of shock therapy suggests that any immediate mood-lifting effect is due to concussion. The temporary euphoria fades after 4 to 6 weeks, and the patient goes back to how they were, but now they have brain damage. People who have gotten this treatment often forget their education and many years of their life. They end up with cognitive deficits and may not be able to make new memories. This is barbarism and stupidity dressed up as science, and that was what Naomi Klein, the first woman I mentioned, wrote her book about. This treatment is only marginally better than the barbarism of a lobotomy, yet doctors today are still doing this to people who cannot consent. In Massachusetts, there is even a doctor using shock therapy on kids with disabilities. This is why I am often terrified of the medical industry, because too many criminally stupid people manage to make it into positions of power. This is also why I am quite concerned about the dark arts of PR and those who attempt to do social engineering. Too many criminally stupid people manage to make it into positions of power when your economy is undergoing an accelerated expansion. This story of non-consensual medical treatment brings me to the case of the third Naomi. This third Naomi is a beautiful actress known for portraying Moneypenny in the recent James Bond films. And when she was just a teenager, doctors cut her open and installed a rod in her spine to make it straight. She said it was an extremely traumatic experience, and it took her a month to relearn how to walk while surrounded by children who had such severe scoliosis that they would never, ever walk. What a wonderful medical success story, some might say that, but most people have never undergone a dangerous spinal operation that may not have been absolutely necessary. For me, these spinal operations are an allegory about the illusion of control. A doctor sees something crooked and wants to straighten it, without thinking too much about the pain caused by interfering with the natural course of things. Of course, I am not unbiased about this issue since I fell out of a tree and broke my back when I was a teenager, and had scoliosis surgery to stabilize the injury site. I am now 40 years old and still have some issues and fears about the medical industry. So please forgive me while I rant a bit. Actually, I think I will skip this section and I will skip to the conclusion about the three Naomis: censorship, medical treatment, and the illusion of control. If you'd like to see my personal rant about the overuse of scoliosis surgery, please click on the blog link and you will find it there. As I scroll past this traumatic medical stuff. Women like the third Naomi, who had the rod installed in her spine as a child, may sublimate the truth about what happened to her because it is too painful to look at the idea that anyone would put you through such unnecessary pain for the sake of the illusion of control or for the sake of keeping their surgical skills sharp and making money. The fact that she spoke out about her trauma at all was brave. Most never say a word because they know that when we see an injustice we cannot alleviate, people tend to blame the victim of the injustice. In the case of these three Naomis, we see three women who were victimized by those who exploited the public's worst tendencies to carry out the crime. They exploited our biases to make us distrust the people who were trying to help us understand something about the greater world, and they exploited our blind spots to make us trust people who would often unknowingly do us harm in their quest for the illusion of control over our minds and bodies. I identify with these three Naomis in many ways because, like Philomela, my education filled my head with academic jargon that made my words incomprehensible to the vast majority of people. It made me trust an organization that was often hurting me by taking all of my energy through night shifts and strange hours. It made me distrust those who wanted to help me by showing me a larger picture. When I try to explain my experience, people often tell me that my opinions are too controversial or speculative, and that controversy and speculation is poison to their community and their sense of how orderly the world is. They like control. When I try to understand their reactions and catch a glimpse of a slice of the big picture, I see that if you take all of the smart people and teach them to speak complex academic languages that no one else speaks, when they try to explain how the world works to someone outside of their specialty, it will be impossible for them to be understood. What a perfect system to maintain centralized control. Such an educational system prevents smart people from ever being able to rally anyone behind a cause, because they can no longer communicate in a language that other people understand. Of course, there are always outliers in such a system, and when people like the three Naomis understand some key part of the big picture while maintaining their ability to communicate in a way that anyone can understand, they are a threat to those who want to maintain the illusion of centralized control. Those who threaten centralized control are invariably treated in shockingly awful ways when their voices rise above the deafening noise of popular culture. So that concludes my video on the three Naomis. I encourage you to take a look at the blog post. There's a lot of interesting accompanying material, some links to videos by a powerful new voice in feminism named Natalie. What was her name? Oh. Well, you'll have to click on the blog post to find out. Thank you for watching. Until next time.